Want more meat? Greedy for an old man, huh? Bang! A cold glass of water splashed straight into my face, right in the middle of Sunday dinner in the house I once bought for my son. Dishes clinked softly, my grandkids giggled, and my daughter-in-law pretended to bend down to pick up a napkin. My son leaned back in his chair, smirking. "You should be grateful I still let you stay in this house. No one handed me a napkin." Only the water ran along the wrinkles on my face, mixing with the salt at the corner of my mouth. I couldn't tell if it was water or shame. I stood up slowly, pulled a handkerchief from my pocket, dried my face and looked straight at the son I traded my whole life to raise. Then I turned around, went to my room, opened the old wooden drawer, and took out the black notebook whose secret only I knew. If one day he wants to know what his house really is, then by tomorrow he'll know clearly nothing in this house ever belonged to him. If you're still here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more hearts, and if it moved you, give it a like so others can find it too. I'm Horace Benton, 68 years old. My hair is white, but my hands are still as steady as when I worked in the mechanic shop in Houston, Texas. I used to lead the heavy truck repair line, a dirty job, but it fed the whole family for 40 years. My wife Loretta and I started in an old apartment in 5th Ward, then slowly bought a small house in Katy. Every brick, every door, every window frame in this house has my fingerprints on it. After Loretta passed 5 years ago, I moved in with my son, Caleb, because he begged, "Dad, don't live alone. I'll take care of you." I believed him. I thought, well, my boy is grown now, has a family, 2 kids, Maya and Jordan. I thought I'd get some peaceful final years, helping with small chores, cooking, picking up the grandkids, hearing their laughter instead of engine noise like in the old days. But I was wrong. Tonight, the usual family dinner went on like every Sunday. I cooked my section of the meal: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, grilled corn, green beans, and honey mustard sauce. Southern habits stayed with me, a full, cozy meal with the whole family around the table. But it stayed warm only until I opened my mouth to ask for another piece of chicken breast. Caleb looked at me like I was a burden. I'd seen that look at companies when people look at an old worker about to be replaced. Cold and empty. He said that line, "Want more meat? Greedy for an old man, huh?" Then tossed a glass of water in my face. The water was cold, like it cut my skin, but the worst pain was his tone, the way he made it sound like I was just a freeloader in the house. My daughter-in-law, Aubrey, sat still. She pretended to pick up a napkin, avoiding my eyes. My 2 grandkids looked at each other, then snickered like it was a joke. In that moment, I realized I was no longer a father, a grandfather, or the owner of this house. I was just an old item they hadn't thrown out yet. I didn't say a word. If it were me 20 years ago, I might have slammed the table. But Loretta always taught me, when someone disrespects you, don't yell. Just stand up straight and walk away. I did exactly that. I stood up, slowly, dried my face, lifted my head and looked straight at the son I once carried on my shoulders through the church gate on Easter Sunday. He dodged my eyes, half smiling, thinking he'd won. I went to my room, my shoes tapping on the wood floor with a cold sound. The small room at the end of the hall used to be my workroom. Now it's where they let me stay. I locked the door, sat in Loretta's old wooden chair, feeling water still dripping from my hair down my collar. Next to the bed was our old wedding photo with a chipped frame. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. I opened the drawer and took out the black notebook, the one I'd kept for over 30 years, from the days at the mechanic shop, recording every savings deposit, every land purchase, every insurance policy number. Caleb never paid attention to it. Maybe he figured I had nothing valuable left besides a small pension and a few old things. He didn't know that all the house papers, accounts, and Loretta's life insurance, all of it was still in my name. I flipped the pages. My handwriting shook but was clear. I remembered every day I worked double shifts to pay Caleb's community college tuition. I remembered selling my old pickup to help him buy a newer Ford Ranger so he wouldn't feel behind his friends. I remembered his wedding night, me standing in the corner of the reception, watching him dance, pride bursting in my chest. Back then, I thought, this life was worth it. And now, I'm sitting here, in the house I put the down payment on with my own hands, getting water thrown in my face by my son like I'm a beggar. I opened the cabinet, pulled the papers out, and organized everything. The house deed, life insurance certificate, savings book, and joint accounts. I once added Caleb's name to make paying bills easier, but he didn't know the primary owner was still me. Everything he's living in the house, the conveniences, even his kids' college loans all trace back to my signature. I looked down at my calloused hands, the joints darkened by oil and time. The same hands that fixed hundreds of engines were shaking now from anger, not weakness. I said quietly in the dark, "You don't know who you just woke up, Caleb." Outside, the TV was still loud. They were watching a comedy show, laughing like nothing had happened. I heard my grandkid yell, "Mom, can I have ice cream?" And in Aubrey's careless reply, I realized something in me had died, the soft, gentle part that believed love alone would be returned with love. No, I don't believe that anymore. I stood up, closed the black notebook, put it in the bottom drawer where the safe key hangs on the cord around my neck. The one Caleb thinks is just his mother's keepsake. I smiled. I knew my plan would start here, in this room, with these hands. I turned off the light, sat on the bed, and listened to the wall clock. Each tick marked the time I'd lost because of my son. But tonight, I didn't feel weak. I felt clear. I wouldn't yell, and I wouldn't punish with my fists. I'd punish with calculated silence. Because sometimes the way to make a person understand their own worth is to let them lose everything they think they own. Outside the window, the streetlight shone in, lighting the old wedding photo. I looked at Loretta's face, her gentle smile saying, "Get up now, Horace. It's time to teach him the lesson you never taught." I nodded lightly. In the dark room, there was only the rustle of papers and the steady breathing of a man who no longer fears being alone because now he knows silence has its own power. Tomorrow, when Caleb wakes up, he'll still think he's the man of the house. But with one signature, he'll learn that everything he's proud of, from the house to the truck in the garage, was never truly his. And that will be the first morning, in his whole life, when I leave a lesson without saying a word. At 18, I left my hometown in Louisiana and followed a cousin to Beaumont, Texas, to apprentice at a small mechanic shop off the highway. I had nothing but strong hands and a simple dream, a roof that didn't leak, a kind wife, and a child who wouldn't grow up lacking the way I did. Every morning I wiped grease from under my nails, smelled motor oil mixed with cheap black coffee, and told myself, it'll be different. One day, Horace Benton will have a decent life. 3 years later, I moved to Houston and rented a corner of an empty warehouse to open my own garage. The shop wasn't big, just a wooden sign I painted myself. Benton's Auto Repair. I worked from 6 in the morning until close to midnight. When everyone locked up and went into bed, I was still under a car, a headlamp lighting the gears and shafts. That's how the first dollars were made, from sweat and an oil-soaked back. At that shop, I met Loretta, the parts delivery clerk with a voice as clear as church bells on Sunday morning. She liked to tease me. "Mr. Benton, do you ever put that wrench down?" I'd say, "As long as this wrench feeds the one I love, I'm not putting it down." 3 years later, we married in a small church in 3rd Ward, just cake, coffee, and the choir singing Amazing Grace. When Caleb was born, I stood by the hospital bed, shaking and crying. I told Loretta, "Our child won't lack a thing, you hear me? He'll have everything I never had." She smiled and held my hand. "Just teach him to love and be a good man, that's enough." But I didn't hear the second part. I only heard, "won't lack a thing," and for my whole life, I chased that promise like I was in debt. When Caleb was 6, I bought his first elementary school uniform, white shirt, red tie, and blue pants. I looked at him in the mirror and felt proud to the point of choking up. I had to drop my night shift to add early mornings, scraping together change to cover it. In high school, I sold my favorite Snap-on tool set to buy his first laptop. "Why, Dad? The old one still works," he asked. I laughed. "I just want you to start better than me." I didn't realize that in that moment I taught him that if he wanted something, all he had to do was ask. Time flew. Caleb grew up smart, smooth-talking, easy to like. I felt proud when neighbors said, "Horace's boy is so polite and bright." I thought maybe I'd been right that I'd raised a good kid. But life isn't that simple. After community college, I helped him finance a 2008 pickup. He beamed, drove off with his friends, leaving Loretta and me watching, proud but empty. Every time a payment was due, I quietly chipped in without telling him. "Let him learn responsibility," Loretta said. I just smiled. I don't want him worn out. When he got engaged to Aubrey, I covered almost half the wedding cost. That night, I asked an old church friend to book a gospel band because Caleb wanted a wedding with real American soul. I didn't mind. I was proud to give my son what he wanted. When the two said they wanted a house in Katy, I didn't hesitate to put down decades of savings for the down payment and put my name on the deed, because Caleb's credit score wasn't enough. He promised to pay me back, but he never did. Then Loretta died. A morning stroke took the only woman who knew how to hold me back when I was about to snap. The house turned empty. I ate breakfast alone, stared at the chair across from me, and the tears fell before I noticed. Caleb saw me getting weaker and said, "Dad, move in with us so I can take care of you." I believed that was filial piety. I didn't know it was the rope that would start tightening around my life. I moved into the small room at the end of the hall, bringing my old radio and a few photos of Loretta. At first, things were peaceful. I watched the kids, cooked, cut the grass, did small jobs around the house. I even opened joint accounts with Caleb to make expenses easier because he said, "You don't need to go to the bank, Dad, I'll handle it." I signed, thinking it was simple. All the savings, insurance, and pension stayed in my name, but Caleb had withdrawal access. I trusted my son. That was my second mistake after believing he was dutiful. A few years later, I started to see Caleb had changed. The kid who laughed while helping me change spark plugs now only talked about stock options and year-end bonuses. Phones swapped often, cars changed every 2 years, watch faces shining. But not once did he ask, "Dad, do you need anything?" The only line I heard was, "Can you sign this so the loan app goes through?" Easier? I still signed, because to me, a father shields his son until his last breath, but I didn't realize that shield turned me into a shadow in my own house. During their backyard BBQs, I stood washing dishes, listening to their laughter and feeling out of place. Once, a friend of Caleb's asked, "He still lives here?" And I heard Aubrey answer, half joking, half true, "Yeah, like part of the furniture." They laughed. I laughed too, but my heart felt drilled through. Sometimes I thought of Loretta. If she were alive, she'd say I was too soft. But she'd also understand. A father who loves his child enough to erase himself might not know where to start when it's time to push back. Then tonight, the night that decided things. A simple dinner, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, grilled corn. I only asked for one more piece of chicken breast, just a small piece because there was extra. And Caleb threw a glass of water in my face. The cold water didn't stun me as much as the cold in his eyes. I don't know when those eyes lost the warmth of the little boy who sat on my shoulders to watch fireworks on the 4th of July. Now there was only contempt. In that moment, I understood all the years I traded couldn't buy a single drop of respect. 30 years of sacrifice, saving, enduring, in exchange for a glass of water and a few laughs. I went to my room, dried my face, and sat on the bed, feeling like I'd just buried a part of my past. I looked at the black notebook and thought about all the times I chose silence. But tonight, silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strength sharpened by pain. I opened the window. The night breeze carried the smell of wet grass and leftover charcoal smoke from the cookout. The streetlight shone through the bars onto the table where I'd set our wedding photo. I whispered, "Loretta, don't worry. I won't let our legacy fall into unworthy hands." Then I closed the notebook, slid it back into the drawer, and felt strangely calm. Tonight, that glass of water didn't just soak my shirt, it washed away 30 years of blindness. And tomorrow morning, when I start, every dollar, every document, this entire house will return to the hands that built it. As for the son who carries the Benton name, he'll learn the most expensive lesson of his life. That respect once lost can't be bought back with any amount of money. That night, after I turned off the light, I still couldn't sleep. Caleb and Aubrey's laughter from the living room cut like dull knives. I lay still, listening to footsteps, the crack of a beer can, the TV blaring. When the house finally went quiet, I sat up, switched on the old desk lamp, and pulled the wooden box from under the bed. Inside were the things I'd guarded more than myself: files, papers, contracts, the memories of a man who lived by his hands. I took out a thick stack of documents, sorted with yellow, sticky tabs: house, deed, insurance, savings, 401, taxes, will draft. The smell of old paper mixed with leftover engine oil took me back to the years buried in the garage. I opened the first packet, the house title. Under the weak light, the bold print stood out: owner, Horace Benton. No Caleb's name, no co-owner, no secondary beneficiary. I smiled slightly. The house he proudly calls my house is really just a place I let him stay. He didn't know that the months I let him pay the utilities were for him to learn responsibility, not because I needed it. I turned to Loretta's life insurance policy. She once said, "If I'm gone one day, you have to live for both of us." I'd kept that promise, but now I knew I had to go further, live with memory, not humiliation. The policy was still valid. I'm the primary beneficiary, no one else. Caleb never knew it existed because Loretta didn't trust his wasteful spending. I moved to the 401k rollover, a small amount I put under self-management after I retired. I once let Caleb check the account online, but he never asked details. I printed the latest statement. The balance is intact. Enough for me to go anywhere and live quietly for the rest of my life. Then, the key part. The 2 joint accounts I opened with Caleb after Loretta died. I found the original contracts. Every word seemed to whisper to me: primary owner, Horace Benton; secondary, access holder, Caleb Benton. Access is valid only until I change the terms. Once I send the remove access order, the bank must lock Caleb out immediately. I nodded, like affirming a verdict already signed. "So, you buried yourself, son." I took a small notebook and started listing action steps. First, close the old safe deposit box at Houston First Credit Union, the one Caleb could access. "I remembered when we opened it," he said. "Dad, let me keep the key in case you forget." I laughed and handed it over, not knowing that, years later, the one holding the key would also be the one locking the last door of respect between father and son. Second, open a new personal account at a different bank where Caleb never banked, maybe Comerica or Frost Bank downtown. I'll transfer all savings, pension, and insurance there, wiping out all old links. Third, set a plan to withdraw cash in parts at multiple branches to avoid attention. I wrote clearly: never more than $900 per withdrawal, spaced 3 days apart, split into separate envelopes. The envelopes will be hidden in the old tool chest under the workbench, where Caleb never touches. Fourth, Back up all records. I laid them out, snapped photos with Loretta's old phone I still keep as a keepsake. I saved everything to a small silver USB. Then I printed extra copies, clipped them, and put them in a manila envelope labeled Benton Legal Docs. Fifth, prep IDs for any scenario. I pulled my driver's license, Medicare card, birth certificate, and even an old copy of my brother-in-law's DD 214 he once let me use for verification. I stacked them neatly in a manila folder, careful as if readying for deployment. I understood. These days, justice isn't just in court, it's in every number, every signature, every file. I'm not young enough to fight with fists, but I have something stronger: knowledge and patience. The next morning, when the first sunlight came through the window, I was still at the table, writing a neat small-lettered checklist. 1. C. A trusted lawyer confirm legal rights and asset protection steps. 2. Go to the post office, rent a private P.O. box, separate mail from Caleb's house. 3. Buy a prepaid SIM, activate a new number, avoid being traced. 4. Book a Greyhound or Amtrak ticket, no credit card, cash only. 5. Contact the new bank, open a personal account, transfer funds, change access. 6. Copy all documents, send one set to the lawyer. 7. Close the old safe deposit box, move everything to a new one. 8. Prepare cash envelopes, hide them in 3 different places. 9. Buy a small travel bag, only for essentials. 10. Write a short letter clear, to be sent to Caleb after I leave. I looked at that list like a map for my survival. Each line was a knife well sharpened. And I knew, silence plus procedure is a cold scalpel, a weapon no amount of shouting can fight. When Caleb woke up, I'd already made coffee and set it on the table like always. I sat reading the paper, calm. He walked by, voice lazy. "You're real free these days. Must be feeling great." I just nodded slightly, saying nothing. I didn't need to say a word. I'd learned that the silence of someone who knows everything is scarier than 100 threats. He left for work, his car rolling off the driveway. I stood up, washed the dishes, wiped the table, a quiet goodbye ritual for the house I was about to leave. I took the file envelope, put it in my old leather briefcase, then hung the key cord around my neck. At noon, I went to the bank. The clerk I know greeted me with a polite smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Benton. How can we help you today?" I answered softly. "I just need to close an old box and update my ownership files." She nodded, typed quickly, asked nothing more. I signed, my hand steady. The old safe deposit box closed along with all of Caleb's access. When I walked out, the Houston sun was harsh, but I felt light, like a boulder finally rolled off my back. I stopped at the corner, bought a sweet tea, sat by the fence and took a long breath. Some pains don't need yelling, just calmly picking up the pieces. In the afternoon, I stopped by a convenience store and bought a prepaid phone, a small notebook and a black pen. I started logging every expense, every appointment, every day in the plan. On the first page, I printed in block letters, Operation Quiet Justice. Night fell. Back home, I heard Caleb talking on the phone out back. "My dad, he's got nothing, lives off me and still wants to have a say." I closed my door and chuckled. If he thinks I've got nothing, that's my biggest advantage. I put the files back in the drawer, turned off the light, and lay down. Outside, a light rain began, pattering on the roof. I listened like listening to my heartbeat, steady, calm, no more anger, because I knew the real payback wouldn't be fists or shouting. It would come with a red stamp, empty account balances, and a collapse in silence. I closed my eyes and told myself, tomorrow will be the first step. And for the first time in years, I slept well in the quiet of a man taking back ownership of his life. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual. Early summer in Houston. The sun was still soft like honey, not yet the midday burn. I made a cup of black coffee and sat by the window looking at the front yard. On the porch, my old boots still lay there, dusty, quiet like my past few years. I took a deep breath, set the cup down, opened the drawer, and pulled the file I'd prepped last night. Everything was there: house papers, insurance, bank accounts, the USB with document images, and the to-do list I wrote in bold. 1. Go to the old bank. Remove Caleb's access. 2. Transfer everything to the new bank. 3. Open a different safe deposit box. 4. Eat lunch like a free man. I smiled at the last line. Eat lunch like a free man. Sounds small, but I knew today would be the first lunch in years where I truly sat down without feeling like an extra in my own life. I put on a white shirt and khakis, a bit of sandalwood aftershave Loretta used to like. In the mirror, a 68-year-old man looked back, salt and pepper hair, deep eyes but standing straight and clear-headed. I grabbed the leather briefcase, hung the key cord around my neck, locked the door, and stepped out. The familiar road to Houston First Credit Union felt longer than usual. I parked, took a breath before going in. Not because I was scared, but to remember this feeling, the feeling of a man deciding to take back his voice. The receptionist, who's known me for years, smiled warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Benton. You're early today." I nodded and replied softly, "Morning, honey. I'd like to speak to Mr. Howard, your branch manager. He knows me well." She nodded, made a call, then invited me to sit in the waiting area. I looked around. The posters on the wall about retirement planning and family trust felt like an accidental mockery. I used to believe in the idea of family, believed that in old age your children would be your refuge. But now I understand. Some children don't keep their parents. They only keep their parents' assets. In less than 5 minutes, Mr. Howard, a silver-bearded, round-built man, stepped out of his office. "Mr. Benton, it's been a while. How are you holding up?" I shook his hand and smiled. "Still kicking, Howard. Still learning new lessons." He laughed and welcomed me into his office. I sat down and set my file case on the desk. "Howard, I need to make some important changes today." He nodded and opened his laptop. "Of course. What kind of changes are we talking about?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Remove every access my son, Caleb Benton, has to my accounts. Close all joint access immediately. Then transfer every cent to a new account under my name only." Howard raised his eyebrows slightly and didn't ask why. He'd met me many times when Loretta was alive. He knew we were the kind who kept our word. He simply said, "As you wish. You are the primary owner. You have full authority." Hearing that, my heart pounded. Not from fear, but from relief. A simple sentence, yet it felt like a hammer sealing the lid on the casket of years of disrespect. Howard printed a thick stack of papers, a series of forms: change of ownership access, account closure authorization, beneficiary update, funds transfer confirmation. I read every line carefully, then signed slowly. Each stroke felt like carving through an invisible shackle. I signed, then signed again and again. Each neat, steady H. Benton. While Mr. Howard carefully stacked the documents, I added, "I want to open a new account at another bank. I've chosen Comerica. I want all savings, including the money market account, moved there. And I want two-factor authentication set with a new phone number." Howard looked up and nodded. "I'll prepare the cashier's checks for the transfer. And yes, the 2FA will be reset once the transfer is complete." He paused, looked at me, and said gently, "Everything okay, Horace? You know, I met your wife years ago. She was a kind woman." I smiled faintly. "She was, and she'd be proud to see I'm finally learning to stand up for myself." About an hour later, everything was done. Howard shook my hand again. "All done. From this moment, you're the only person with access. Caleb's rights are officially revoked. I gripped his hand. Thank you, Howard. That means more than you know. I stepped out of the bank. The midday sun fell on my shoulders, but my back felt lighter, as if someone had lifted off a decade of endurance. I stood on the steps and watched people rush in and out. Everyone was in a hurry except me. I strolled down the side street and stopped at a small soul food place Loretta used to love. Inside, the smell of fried chicken and cornbread drifted through the air. I ordered fried catfish, collard greens, and an iced tea. When the plate arrived, I didn't eat right away. I just sat and looked out the window, golden light spread across the table, lighting the lemon slices in my glass like glass shards. I thought of Loretta. If she were alive, she'd probably smile, lay a hand on my shoulder and say, "See, you could do it." I ate slowly, savoring each bite. The fish was hot and bold, but what I swallowed wasn't just food, it was freedom after 30 years of being bound. When I left, I paid cash, added a crisp dollar tip for the server, and walked out with steps light as the breeze. In the afternoon, I drove to the Comerica Bank in Midtown. A young teller asked if I needed help opening a new account. I laid it out clearly. I want 2 accounts, checking and money market, both under my name, no joint holder. I'll also need a new safe deposit box. She smiled. We can do that for you, sir. In just 2 hours, everything was set. I moved all the money with the cashier's check Howard had prepared, placed all original documents and the USB with scans into the new safe deposit box. I kept the key, slipped it into my inside pocket, then looked around the cold, bright vault room. The smell of steel and conditioned air lingered quiet enough that I could hear my heartbeat. Before I left, the teller asked, "Do you want anyone else authorized to access the box?" I answered briefly, "No, not this time. Not ever again." I drove home slowly, passing the streets Loretta once loved to walk. I stopped at a red light in front of the little two-gable church where we were married nearly 40 years ago. For a moment, I saw Loretta standing on the steps in a pale blue dress, waving and laughing. I smiled softly and whispered, "I did it, honey." By the time I got home, dusk had settled. The TV blared and the smell of fried food drifted from the kitchen. Caleb was on the couch with his feet on the table, watching sports. He glanced back and tossed out, "Where were you all day, Dad? You should let me know in case you need anything." I looked at him and said calmly, "I just went to take care of a few things." He smirked, half joking, half serious. "Don't worry so much. This house is mine already, just relax." I looked straight at him and smiled. "Sure, you can think that." Then I walked past him to my room and closed the door softly. I took off the key cord from my neck, set it on the desk, sat down, and opened the black notebook. Under the line I'd written last night, Operation Quiet Justice, I added a small line in blue ink. "Starting today, freedom is restored. Caleb doesn't know that everything he touches is now only an illusion." I closed the notebook and leaned back. Outside, his laughter rose again, loud, careless, arrogant. But this time, my heart wasn't heavy. I felt at peace, like an old mechanic who finally shuts down the machine, wipes his hands, and knows he's finished the final job of his life perfectly. In the days that followed, I lived so calmly that Caleb truly thought I had let the past go. He still joked, still watched loud TV, still bragged to neighbors that the house was almost transferred over. And me, every morning I still brewed coffee, read the paper, and caught a bus to wander, except instead of going to the park or church like usual, I went to the bank. For 3 days straight I withdrew small amounts, never too much. Each time only from $480 to $900, depending on the branch. I withdrew at 3 different places: Midtown, South Houston, then a small branch near the Katy Freeway. The young teller at window 2 smiled at me like always. "Mr. Benton, bringing gifts for the grandkids again?" I smiled gently. "Yeah, giving them a little something for fun." She didn't know the gift I was giving was to myself the gift of freedom. I gathered the cash, rolled it with rubber bands, and carefully placed it into Loretta's old tin cookie box. The round blue box with yellow daisies used to hold the cookies she baked every Christmas. Now it held nearly $12,000 all in cash, neatly stacked in small envelopes. I set it at the bottom of the tool cabinet where Caleb had never once touched. On the third afternoon, I drove to a post office in another district and picked a quiet window. I rented a P.O. box of my own and paid 6 months in cash. The clerk asked, "Do you want to use your real name?" I answered, "Of course. But if anyone asks, tell them Mr. Horace Benton moved away a long time ago." He chuckled, thinking I was joking. I chuckled too, but inside I felt as calm as someone who had just cut the last binding thread. After that, I stopped by a small phone shop and bought a prepaid SIM with no contract. Once it was activated, I saved exactly 2 numbers, Attorney Martin Hale's and Pastor Owens's at the old church. I erased the entire old contact list on my main phone, even Caleb's number. I didn't want a single call from him to make me hesitate ever again. That night, I sat in my room with the desk lamp shining on the black notebook. I opened a new page and wrote the title in capital letters, Plan to Leave No Return. The first lines: Step 1. Finish the withdrawals. Step 2. Prepare the trip Amtrak to Savannah, then bus down to Beaufort, South Carolina. I didn't choose Beaufort by accident. It's a small town I visited nearly 40 years ago when I drove long haul. The place smells like sea salt, with white-painted historic homes along the river and folks who greet you with kind eyes. I remember telling Loretta, when I retire, I want to live somewhere that quiet. And now I would keep that promise only, alone. I went on the Amtrak website on my laptop and booked a one-way ticket to Savannah. I chose a window seat. I paid with the new Comerica card. The itinerary read, Depart Monday morning at 4:45 a.m., Houston to New Orleans transfer, then arrive in Savannah the next morning. From there, I'd take a local bus down to Beaufort, just over 2 hours. I closed the laptop and leaned back, my heartbeat slow, no longer nervous, but certain. The next day, I called Martin Hale, Pastor Owen's old friend. Martin is half retired, still helping seniors with legal paperwork in the community. When he heard my name, he laughed. "Horace Benton? I thought you disappeared." Loretta once had me look over a life policy years back. She was a good one. I paused, then said softly, "It's just me now, Martin. And I need you to help me one last time." We met at a small cafe off Westheimer. I brought my file case and arrived early. When Martin came, I told the story briefly, no embellishment, no tears. He listened and nodded slowly. "You want to set up a letter of instruction, I can help. But I feel like there's something else you're not saying." I took out a sealed envelope and set it on the table. "I want you to keep this letter. On the 7th day after I leave Houston, send it to Caleb Benton. Not earlier, not later." Martin looked at me, eyes mixing curiosity and compassion. "What's in it?" I only said, "A short message that will make him understand what he's refused to understand his whole life." That night, I sat at the table and wrote that letter. I used Loretta's fountain pen, the one she used to sign our first home purchase. On plain paper, I wrote in slow, firm strokes, "You threw water in your father's face, so I drained what you thought was yours. Respect is the only investment you can't buy back. Horace Benton." Nothing else needed. I folded it, sealed it in cardstock, then signed the lower corner. When I folded that letter, I knew I had nothing left to lose, except a sadness that had lost its value. And what about you, if you were in my place? Would you have the courage to leave in silence? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes your experience might be the comfort someone else needs while enduring the same thing. I handed it to Martin the next day with careful instructions. Send it 7 days after I leave. If I call to cancel, discard it. He just looked at me for a long moment and said softly, "Horace, some lessons can only be taught through loss." I understand. I had one last task: update the beneficiary on the new account. I called the bank and requested that a portion be designated for the Loretta Benton Scholarship Fund, a community scholarship Pastor Owen set up to help underprivileged black students get into college. I want her name spoken every year by grateful kids. In the afternoon, I started packing. I wasn't taking much, just 3 sets of clothes, my medication, a toothbrush, and the black notebook that's been with me for half my life. I carefully added our wedding photo, the old print a bit faded, but her smile still bright beneath the veil. And finally, I slipped off my wedding ring, threaded it through a leather cord, and put it around my neck. The only piece of jewelry I'd take, and a promise I've never broken. I'll live long enough to protect what belongs to us. Sunday night, I set the alarm for 4:30 a.m. I chose that time because I knew Caleb and Aubrey would be in their deepest sleep. No one would hear me leave, no goodbyes needed. Before bed, I looked around the small room, once my workspace, now emptied out. I set Loretta's photo on the nightstand and lit a small candle. "Honey," I whispered, "tomorrow morning I'm leaving. Not out of hate, but because I want to live the rest of my life without being treated like a burden. I want peace, and I know you understand that better than anyone." I blew out the candle and lay down. In the dark, the clock ticked, blending with the soft patter of night rain outside the eaves. I smiled faintly. Tomorrow, when Caleb wakes up, he'll still see the breakfast I left like always: muffins, brewed coffee, the tablecloth folded neat. But a few hours later, when he opens the banking app, he'll see something else. Everything he thought was his is gone. And me, I'll be on a train heading east toward the sunrise. And that will be the first dawn in years when I truly feel alive again. The alarm rang at 4:30 a.m., small but sharp enough to jolt my heart. I sat up immediately, not giving myself a chance to hesitate. In the dim light of the room, everything looked the same: the leather chair with a torn corner, the yellowed wardrobe, Loretta's photo on the small table. Only I was different. I was no longer the old man who got water thrown in his face, no longer a shadow wandering in his own house. Today, I was the one leaving. I put on a clean cotton shirt and pressed khakis. I laced my shoes, slipped on the necklace with Loretta's ring, then stood quietly beside the bed. The soft yellow lamp lit our wedding photo. She was still smiling, gentle, a little mischievous. I leaned down and whispered, "I'm going, Loretta, going to take back my life." No tears, just a long breath and a lightness. I pulled my small brown suitcase, letting the wheels roll softly across the floor, careful to avoid any squeaks. Walking down the hall, I paused at the family photo in the center, taken one Thanksgiving. Loretta in the middle with her arm around Caleb, me in the back squinting at the camera flash. Looking now, even then Caleb's eyes held something distant, an early arrogance I was too blind to see. I sighed and moved on. The front door opened and a cold draft rushed in. Outside, Houston's sky was still pitch black. Sodium streetlights smeared yellow across rain-wet asphalt, leaving blurred streaks. I turned up my collar, stepped onto the porch, and placed the house key in the mailbox, a symbolic gesture, a way to return the past. The Uber arrived on time. The driver, a black man around 30 with a raspy but pleasant voice, greeted me. "Good morning, sir. Heading to Amtrak station?" "Yeah," I answered briefly. He glanced at me in the rear view with a smile. "Early start, huh?" I just nodded and smiled. He didn't need to know this wasn't an early start. It was a restart after 68 years of living for others. The car rolled past quiet blocks. The city still slept, save for a few dim lights at early opening gas stations. I looked through the window. Familiar streets suddenly felt foreign. The place where I'd lived half my life slid by like an old film, fuzzy behind morning mist. When we pulled up to the Amtrak station in Houston, dawn hadn't broken yet. I pulled my suitcase, paid cash, and said softly, "Take care, kid." He wished me a safe trip and drove off. I stood for a moment, looking up at the metal Houston Station sign glowing faintly in neon. It felt strange and ceremonial, like seeing myself off. Inside, there were only a few people: a young woman holding a baby, an elderly couple, and two backpackers chuckling quietly. The PA murmured, "Amtrak Crescent Line to New Orleans, departing at 4:45 a.m." I showed my ticket to the attendant and got a friendly nod. "Safe travels, sir." I found a window seat, set my suitcase beside me, and opened the black notebook. The train shuddered, then began to move. Outside, Houston faded. Streetlights slipped away into the distance until only darkness and the glow of warehouse lots remained. I rested my hand on the notebook, the one thing holding my plans, secrets, and survival. I pulled out a pen and wrote on a new page. Respect isn't born on its own. It's the discipline of the heart and the price of lazy love. I read it back, closed the notebook, and leaned my head against the seat. The steel wheels sang on the rails, steady as the heartbeat of a man who knows his direction. In New Orleans, the train paused for over an hour. I stepped onto the platform, bought a hot coffee and small beignets, and sat outside watching people pass. Loretta and I once spent a short honeymoon here. I can still remember the scent of jazz threading through the old streets. Back then, I was a young mechanic with nothing but a dream of buying a house. Now I'd come back with empty hands but a light heart. When the train rolled on, I didn't sleep. I watched scenes streak by fields, steel bridges, rivers reflecting a faint moon. By the next afternoon, the train slowed into Savannah, Georgia. The sky was softly gray, but the air carried something different: damp, salty, peaceful. I pulled my suitcase onto the platform and took a deep breath. The river breeze brought hints of wet wood, seaweed, and smoke from small restaurants near the docks. I walked to the local bus depot and bought a ticket to Beaufort, South Carolina. The ticket seller, a middle-aged woman with silver curls, spoke in a sweet southern lilt. "Heading to Beaufort? It's lovely quiet, lots of retirees." I nodded with a smile. "Sounds like where I ought to be." The little bus rattled gently along the coast road. Through the window I saw pines and marshes, water catching the gold of late afternoon. Each small bridge felt like crossing out another piece of my past, one old breath at a time. By the time we reached Beaufort, the day had tilted into evening. The air tasted softly of salt, warm and slightly sticky. I rolled my suitcase down the main street, white-painted wooden houses, American flags on porches, hanging baskets swaying with purple flowers. People greeted each other. A few nodded and smiled as I passed. It had been a long time since I'd seen eyes with no judgment, no disdain, just simple recognition between humans. I stopped at a small motel by the marsh with a faded sign that read Bayview Lodge. The clerk, a rosy-faced older man with a belly, looked up. "Need a room, sir?" "Yeah, 1 week, cash." He wrote in the ledger and handed me a key. "Room 12, sir. Check out any time you wish." I paid cash, left no address, used no credit card. Everything I did now was to erase the trail of old accounts. The room was small but clean. The window looked out on the wool marsh where herons perched on weathered pilings. I opened the window and let the salty air pour in. I breathed deep for the first time in years. My lungs weren't heavy with kitchen smoke or forced silence. I sat on the bed, opened my phone, and typed a message to Martin Hale. "Start counting 7 days." I hit send, powered the phone down, removed the battery, and set it on the table. Outside, the sun was sinking behind distant trees. Orange-gold light flooded the room, glowing through the thin curtains like silk. I opened the black notebook and wrote the last line of the day. "Every step away has a price. But sometimes the only price for living is leaving the place where you've been dying slowly." I closed the notebook and set it on my chest. Crickets sang beyond the window, blending with the soft lapping of marsh water, and I realized this was the true dawn of my life, even if it began at a sunrise no one else would see. That Monday morning, as the Beaufort bus curved over a wooden bridge looking out on the marsh while I sat in a small cafe with my coffee 1,000 miles away in Katy, Texas, Caleb was walking into a supermarket. He had no idea today would be the first day of a collapse and the day when everything he'd taken for granted would slip out of his hands in minutes. As someone at church later told it, that morning Caleb lined up at the register like usual. He bought liquor, cereal for the kids, some electronics, and a bag of pricey beef jerky. When he swiped, the reader errored out. He frowned and tried again. Again. Transaction declined. The cashier spoke softly, politely. "Sorry. Would you like to try another card?" Caleb forced a smile and pulled another still no-go. That's when his face started to change. People behind him glanced over, flustered. He ditched the liquor, kept a carton of milk and a bag of chips. "Must be the system," he muttered, then pushed the cart outside and dialed the Crast Bank. A calm female voice came through as if reading a sentence. "Mr. Benton, your access to all linked accounts was revoked on Friday. The sole legal owner now is Mr. Horace Benton." I wish I could have seen his face, probably ash white, he snapped. "What? No way. I'm a joint account holder. I have access rights." The voice stayed even. "Not anymore, sir. The change was signed and confirmed by the owner. From this moment, you no longer have permission to use, transfer, or withdraw funds." Caleb clenched the phone, veins standing in his neck. He shouted in the car, "My dad? What is he doing?" But instead of an answer, the line ended with the same finality. "Thank you for calling. Have a nice day." When the call ended, his breath came ragged. In his life, no one had ever stripped him of control like that. Since he was young, I covered everything: tuition, a car, the wedding, the house. In his mind, father wasn't a person, just a bottomless point. Wallet. Now that wallet was gone, and he had no idea what to do. Caleb drove home, tires screeching up the driveway. He opened my door and froze. The room was empty. The bed neatly made, the blanket squared. No paper on the desk, no trace. The closet bare, except for our wedding photo standing upright, like a silent goodbye. He scanned the room, breathing fast. "Dad?" The word slipped out, but no one answered. Only a cold emptiness. Aubrey heard him and ran up. Seeing the room, she gripped the doorframe. "Where's Horace? Where did he go?" Caleb muttered. "I don't know, but he took all the money." Her eyes went wide. "What? Where's the mortgage payment, the car payment? You said you had everything covered." Caleb said nothing. He tossed his phone on the bed, his hands shaking. The house, usually noisy, went dead quiet. Downstairs, the kids watched cartoons, but even they felt the weight in the air. Aubrey stepped closer, voice rising. "Say something. The insurance is due. The kids' school fees. You said it was all handled." Caleb shouted. "I don't know. The old man did something. Maybe he's really lost it." Aubrey looked at him with a mix of fear and contempt. "You're always saying, 'This is my house. That's my money.' Now let's see who the real owner is." Caleb moved to respond, but nothing came out. He ran to the kitchen, flipped open the laptop, tried to log in, denied. He opened the banking app. The screen flashed a cold line. Access permanently revoked. He dropped his head on the table and slammed his fist into the chair. For the first time in his life, Caleb understood what it felt like to lose power, something he never thought could happen. He started making calls to relatives, friends, co-workers. "Did my dad say anything to you? Did he go back to his hometown?" Everyone answered, "No, we haven't heard anything." Someone even said bluntly, "I thought he passed. In a way, haven't seen him in years." That afternoon, Aubrey sat at the dining table, staring at her husband with angry eyes. "Tell me the truth, do you have money somewhere else? Don't tell me it was all in that old man's accounts." Caleb stayed silent. Her breath quickened, her voice tightening. "So what now? The house isn't paid off. The car has 2 payments left. You thought you were so capable, look at you now. Where's your provider pride?" He shouted, voice cracking. "Shut up, Aubrey. I'll handle it." But he knew there was nothing left to handle. Rumors spread faster than the wind. Within 3 days, the whole church in Katy and the neighborhood were buzzing. People whispered, "Horace's son disrespected his father. Heard he threw water in his face. Now he's been left behind with nothing." By Sunday, the pastor read the familiar passage from Exodus. "Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the comm's land." The whole church fell silent. In the middle pews, Caleb kept his head down, face hard. He could feel dozens of eyes pinned to his back. Some people avoided greeting him. Others just gave a slight shake of the head. The pastor paused, his gaze landing exactly where Caleb sat. "Some people," he said, "are learning this lesson the hardest way." Aubrey lowered her head, lips pressed tight. Caleb clenched his fists, wanting to get up and leave, but he didn't dare. For the first time in his life, he knew what it felt like to have the whole world turn its back on him. The next week, the knocking on the door began. The first was Mr. Davis, owner of the auto shop Caleb owed for parts. "Caleb, time to pay what you promised." Caleb snapped. "I'll transfer it later." "Mr. Davis shook his head, voice firm. "Transfer with what? I heard your accounts are locked. Don't forget, I let you run a tab out of respect for your father, not for you." Then came his wife's rotating savings group, the middle-aged women who used to praise Aubrey for having a successful husband. Now they stood in the yard, voices sharp. "Aubrey, it's your turn to contribute this week. Where's the money?" Aubrey flushed and tried. "We're transferring a little late." "Late? Heard this house isn't even in your names anymore." The snide laughs, the prying looks, they cut deeper than knives. That afternoon, as I sat by the motel window in Beaufort, watching rain fall on the marsh, I could picture it all. Caleb's face, Aubrey's eyes, the cold house where shouting replaced dinner. I didn't feel glee, just calm. Because everything was returning to where it belonged. Caleb once threw a glass of water in my face and said I should be grateful to stay. Now he was the one the world was throwing cold water on with contempt and shame. When the motel clock struck 8 p.m., I typed a line in the black notebook. "Somewhere between Beaufort and Houston, the truth is reclaiming justice. I don't need to see it only to know it's happening." Outside, wind moved through the trees along the marsh. I smiled softly and took a deep breath. Not out of joy, but because justice finally had a taste salty like tears and clear like the air after a storm. The next morning, I woke to thick dew. First light slipped through the thin curtain, pooling gold on the wooden floor. No more shouting, no more burnt food smell or blaring TV like in Houston. Just birds and the briny draft from the Beaufort River slipping through the doorframe. I brewed a black coffee and sat on the sill, watching the river in the distance change color with the sun. The water shifted from silvery gray to a gentle blue, then caught gold like a quiet flame. Far off, the Woods Memorial Bridge lowered for a small boat to pass. Gears turned slowly, the mechanical sound echoing through the quiet, a sound that reminded me of a lifetime in the shop, when things were controlled by hands and real sweat. I decided to walk to the bridge. No rush, no destination. Each step peeled off another layer of old memory. Sea wind fluttered, the smell of salt mixing with the green along both banks. I stood in the middle of the bridge, hand on the worn iron rail, looking at the water below, not hurried, just steady and sure, as if teaching me how to live what's left at 68, not to run away, but to let what needs to drift, drift. Near noon, I stopped at a little shrimp and grits spot by the river. The place was called Mabel's Kitchen, painted white with red floral curtains. Butter and fried shrimp perfumed the air, with old jazz playing softly. The owner, a black woman around 50, full-figured with a kind smile, set my plate down and said, "Here you go, Mr. Benton. You from Texas, right? You got that quiet kind of tired on you." I chuckled lightly. Maybe I'm tired from being quiet too long. She raised her brows and nodded. Then you're in the right place. In Beaufort, everybody's got something to heal in silence. I ate slowly. Each spoonful of shrimp and grits, warm with a gentle heat, brought me back to the present. No one asked where I was from, what I did, or why I was here. They just smiled, greeted me, and left me be. Kindness in Beaufort wasn't pity, it was unconditional calm. In the afternoon, I stopped by a local bank branch, small, red brick, an American flag drifting lazily out front. I opened a new account, showed my ID and originals. The teller looked over the papers and confirmed gently, "Welcome to Beaufort, Mr. Benton." I nodded, feeling renamed. Not someone's father. Not a pitied man, simply a lawful citizen still able to hold title to his own property. I moved part of the money from Bank B, then rented a new safe deposit box. I put in the important papers, a copy of the instruction letter, the scholarship certificate, our wedding photo, and the USB with document scans. When the box clicked shut, I breathed in that clack sounded like confirmation that I'd fully left Houston. That evening, I wandered around the little Port Royal harbor, listening to the tide hush under the wooden walkways. Low houses along the shore glowed warm. Somewhere a banjo drifted. I sat on a public bench, opened the black notebook and wrote, "Day 8. People live so slowly here I can hear my own breathing. Maybe that's what I lost for years. Living, not just existing." The next day, I found the town's community center. A small building, pale yellow, with photos of free classes inside. Yoga, crochet, painting, and a handwritten flyer in marker. Woodcraft for beginners, for hands that still remember how to build. I signed up on the spot. When I walked into the first class, the smell of fresh-cut pine lightened me. The instructor, an old white-haired man named Ray who'd worked wood for 40 years, shook my hand and said, "Hands like yours don't forget." I smiled. They just need a reason to start again. From then on, I sawed, planed, and fitted joints. I made wooden toys for the kids at the local church horses, little trucks, crocodiles with turning wheels. When I brought them by, the kids laughed, and the old pastor patted my shoulder. "You're doing what Loretta used to do for folks, bringing joy to the right place." At night, I went back to the motel and fell asleep to crickets and the tide's rhythm, plain sounds, yet full of pulse. For the first time in ages, I slept deep. No dreams, no jolts awake, no midnight door sounds or money talk. Before lights out, I looked at Loretta's photo on the small wooden table by the bed and said softly, "See? I'm still kind, just kind to the right people." I smiled, because that's what Loretta used to say when I bent too far. Now I understood kindness doesn't mean letting people trample you. It means keeping a good heart without letting anyone use it. Saturday morning, I visited the local church and met Pastor Owens to finalize the scholarship. We sat in a small wood-floored room overlooking a yard with a big oak. I set the file on the table and said, "I want the annual interest from my new savings to go to a community scholarship in my wife's name, the Loretta Benton Scholarship Fund." The pastor looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his gentle face. "You've turned pain into a gift. Not everyone can do that," I replied. "I don't want Caleb to remember me for money. I want people to remember Loretta for kindness." That afternoon, I returned to the Woods Memorial Bridge. The wind blew stronger, lifting salt and wave sound. I leaned on the rail, watching the river's flat surface, broken only by small rings where fish stirred. I realized my life was like this river, once muddied, then clearing as soon as no one kept stirring it. I opened the black notebook and added, "This chapter is called the self-rescue phase. No one can do it for you. Water runs clean only when it lets itself flow." That night, with moonlight over the marsh, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, listening to the soft lap of waves. Each sound a reminder. Don't go back. Don't regret. I understood that life isn't measured by years lived, but by how many times you stand up for yourself. And finally, after all these years, I'd done it with silence, justice, and a peace no one could take. 7 days had passed since I arrived in Beaufort. Everything had settled into its gentle rhythm. I walked early, had breakfast at Mabel's kitchen, then made wood toys for the kids' class. The March sun was honey soft, the sea breeze light, my heart as calm as the morning river. But today, as I brewed coffee, I knew a wooden door in Houston was hearing 3 heavy knocks. Attorney Martin Hale, right on schedule, stood at the house in Katy. He wore a light shirt and held the sealed envelope I'd handed him a week earlier. Neighbors peeked and guessed. The door opened. Caleb appeared, gaunt, stubbled. Behind him, you could hear a child crying and dishes clattering. Martin spoke softly, exactly as I'd asked. "I'm here at the request of Mr. Horace Benton. He left this for you." Caleb took the envelope, eyes wary suspicion mixed with fear. Martin said nothing more, just gave a polite nod and left. The door closed, the hinges squealed dryly like the sound of past being bolted shut. Caleb sat at the dining table, hands shaking as he tore the envelope. Inside was a single sheet, written in the familiar handwriting he'd seen on old Christmas cards. A brief line, cold as steel. "You threw water to erase your father's face, so I erased the borrowed life you were living. No return address, no signature, no greeting. Only legal silence, each word the final nail in the coffin of his pride." Caleb reread it, then crumpled the paper, but didn't tear it. He knew even if he did, the words were already etched deeper than ink. Aubrey stepped out of the living room with the little one on her hip. "Who's it from?" Caleb rasped. "My dad." She gave a thin smile, no longer surprised, and shot a blade-sharp look. "So he didn't die, he just went quiet so you could die slow." She opened the envelope, read it, then set it down. Her eyes softened, but her voice was clear and cold. "You know, I used to think I married a strong man. Now I just see a boy who never grew up, and I don't want our kids learning that." Caleb looked up, voice choking. "What are you going to do?" Aubrey didn't answer. She went straight to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and folded clothes. The little one cried for Mom. The older asked, "Dad, is Grandpa coming back?" He couldn't say a word. 10 minutes later, Aubrey led the kids out without looking back. She left one line behind, neat and cutting like a blade, into his hollow pride. "You don't know respect, I won't stay." The door shut for real this time. In the wide house, only the half-playing TV and the ticking clock remained. Caleb sat in a chair, eyes vacant. On the table, the old water stain from the night he threw the glass at me was still there, faded but clear. In the sun, it looked like an evidence mark time had framed impossible to wipe away. He stared at that stain a long time. When the sun shifted and the light angled onto the wall, he finally understood he'd lost everything because he only knew how to hold his hand out, never to bow his head. The next day, he went to the bank. His voice was hoarse as he told the teller, "I want to know if there's any way to restore my access. I'm a joint holder." She checked the system, voice mechanical. "I'm sorry, Mr. Benton. That account was fully converted to sole ownership. You don't have the rights to request changes." He asked again, voice breaking. "No way at all?" "No, sir. It's all legal." Caleb turned away, slamming his hand on the counter, and no one cared. He wasn't the successful neighborhood man anymore, just someone trying to grab his own shadow. He drove to his lawyer's office. The young attorney flipped through documents, examined the papers, then shook his head. Everything is in Mr. Horace Benton's name. He followed proper procedure. No signs of fraud. You can sue, but the court will dismiss it. Caleb pounded the desk and yelled, "I'm his son. He owes me." The lawyer shot back, "No one owes anyone anything just because of blood. The law doesn't protect ingratitude." He went silent and left under the pitying looks of others. In the weeks that followed, the house in Katy turned desolate. Neighbors said the porch light stayed on all night, but inside was dark. Every morning, Caleb sat on the steps, hair messy, eyes hollow. Someone brought the paper. He didn't take it. Someone said hello. He didn't respond. The once swaggering figure shrank like a tree stump. One evening, I got a voicemail. The screen showed the name, Caleb Benton. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then pressed play. His voice trembled, broken, halting. "Dad, I'm sorry. I don't know how it ended up like this. I shouldn't have said those things. I was just angry. If you hear this, please call me back. I need you." I listened through, then set the phone down. I didn't delete it, and I didn't call back. I just sat quietly, hearing the tide on the shore. Forgiving isn't hard. I did it the moment I left Houston, forgiving myself for tolerating too long, forgiving him for not knowing better. But going back? No. Going back would deny the lesson both of us had to pay for. I opened the black notebook and wrote, "Forgiveness is the heart's work. Going back is the mind's work. And sometimes the mind must guard the door." That night, I went out to the motel porch. Moonlight spread over the marsh like silver thread. I looked up where the stars knitted a thin net. I knew Loretta would understand. I sipped my tea, breathed the salty wind deep, and murmured to myself, "My son finally called me Dad. It's a shame it took a lifetime to learn to say it." Outside, waves tapped the shore, one soft layer after another. I smiled faintly, not from glee, but because the lesson had finally arrived. And sometimes, silence is the deepest way a father can say, "I hear you, son." I still remember the morning of the second week after Martin mailed the letter. In Beaufort, the sun rose early and the river glittered like gold dust. But in Katy, Texas, something else was brightening the truth. In the neighborhood Caleb once bragged was full of educated folks. Whispers spread faster than summer wind. Everyone had heard about the son who splashed water in his father's face and ended up with nothing. People added details, a little extra spice, as if each had seen it with their own eyes. In the morning, when Caleb went out for the paper, his neighbor Sam, the guy who used to drink beer and show off his new car with him, gave a thin nod and turned away. Miss Wilson next door, a gossip, pulled her curtains shut. His drinking and bragging buddies, the ones who slapped backs at BBQs, fell quiet. No texts, no calls, no weekend fishing invites. Caleb began to realize the title, "The Benton Family's Provider," he'd been so proud of no longer meant anything to anyone. All that remained was a house littered with bills, mortgage, utilities, car payments, school fees for 2 kids, and a heap of pride he hadn't yet paid for. He tried going back to church after weeks of hiding. The wooden doors opened to incense and dim light falling from stained glass. No one drove him out, but no one welcomed him either. Silent eyes followed him all the way to the last pew. Pastor Owen stepped down, speaking gently. "Caleb." He looked up awkwardly. "Yes, Pastor." The old man studied him for a moment, then said slowly, "Son, respect is your first debt in life. And it's the one debt that, if you don't pay, you'll have nothing left to live decently." Caleb bowed his head. No excuse left to offer. In that moment, he saw himself in the mirror of guilt, a man who thought he was strong, but had only been leaning on others to stand. Meanwhile, in Beaufort, my life had settled into the soft rhythm of waves. I'd go to the docks at dawn where the black fishermen gathered to start the day. They carried the smell of salt, machine oil, and familiar sweat. Some greeted me with a smile, others handed me a paper cup of coffee. I learned knots with them, simple bowline, then figure eight, then clove hitch. Each knot came with a story. One afternoon, old Eddie, the eldest, told me about teaching his grandson to fish. The boy asked, "Why tie? It's so tight." I said, "If it's loose, it drifts. Tie it wrong, it chokes." Same with people. You gotta know what you're holding and who you're holding it for. I listened and nodded. In the late light, his voice and the waves sounded like a simple sermon on living. I didn't talk much. I listened and smiled. Here, no one asked what I used to do, how much I had, or why I lived alone. Folks only asked, "Had lunch yet, Mr. Benton? Want more shrimp in the gumbo?" And that was enough. Concern in Beaufort asked for no past as a condition. Each afternoon, I sat with them over a steaming gumbo pot, eating while the old men talked about the service, family, life. I only added in when someone mentioned fathers and sons. Once a young deckhand named Malik asked, "You got a son, sir?" I paused, then smiled. "Yes. But now I'm letting him learn to be a man without me spotting him." Malik nodded and didn't pry. The nod said enough. That night, I went back to my room, took a plain postcard of the Woods Memorial Bridge, the bridge I walked each morning, and wrote. I didn't address a specific person, just to Street Andrews Church, Houston. The note was short, "For the Children's Fund," signed, "A Father." I slid it into an envelope, stamped it, and mailed it the next morning. When the clerk asked, "Do you want a return address?" I smiled and shook my head. No need. A good deed doesn't need a name. Leaving the post office, I strolled along the river. The wind blew hard, carrying salt and gull cries. On the bridge, workers were fixing broken rails. I stopped and watched the hammer's sharp rhythm on metal, steady as a person mending himself. I thought of Caleb, the house in Katy, that old watermark on the table that probably still hadn't been wiped. Strangely, I felt no anger, no bitterness, no sting. Only a steady peace, like a welder after finishing the last bead, knowing it will hold, even if no one sees it. That evening, I sat at the small wooden desk, opened the black notebook, and wrote a few lines. I did not win. I just stood in the right place. Peace doesn't come from making someone else fall, but from stopping the need to prove you were hurt. Then I closed the notebook and looked around the small room, not fancy, but clean, tidy, and mine. The window faced the river. Moonlight fell across it like a silver scarf. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the faraway tide. Tonight, I no longer dream of the glass of water. No more cold splashing my face, no more mocking laughter. In my sleep, there's only the sea breeze, children laughing somewhere, and Loretta's voice whispering, "You did the right thing, Horace. You only took back the decency you deserved." I smiled in the dream. Not a triumphant smile, but the smile of someone who finally saw himself in a true mirror. One morning in early April, when the wind from the Beaufort River still carried a salty mist and church bells drifted from afar, I stopped by the little post office at the end of the street like I always do. The silver-haired clerk, who knows me by name, smiled as she handed me a pale yellow envelope. "You've got mail from Houston, Mr. Benton." I took the envelope and looked at the scrawled handwriting, Caleb's handwriting. For a moment, I stood still, my finger on the postmark. It had been years since I'd seen that script, the way he always tilted the letter H to the left and skipped the top stroke, a habit I must have corrected 100 times back in grade school. I didn't open it right away. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and kept walking across the Woods Memorial Bridge like every morning. The water under the bridge reflected the pale sky. The wind pressed into my shirt, cold but gentle. I thought, if I open the letter here, maybe I'll read it with my heart, not my memories. Back at the motel, I made a cup of tea, sat down at the table, and opened the letter. Dad, I know I probably don't deserve to write those 2 letters, but I can't keep living like this without saying something. I've lost everything. Aubrey took the kids. The house is about to be foreclosed. Friends turned their backs. But what weighs on me most isn't money. It's knowing I erased the one person who ever stood by me. I'm not asking for money, not asking for forgiveness. I just want to meet and say, I'm sorry, even if it's late. If you don't want to see me, I understand. But if possible, just once, so I can truly bow my head. Caleb. I folded the letter. No shaking, no anger, and not relief either. Just the heavy feeling of a stone dropping into water, sending up deep ripples I thought had settled. I set the letter on the table and didn't touch it for 3 days. I wanted to let my heart weigh itself, instead of letting my head decide for it. Those 3 nights, I still took my walks, still listened to the waves at the dock, still ate dinner at Mabel's kitchen, still talked wood with old Eddie. But back in my room, I kept looking at the envelope on the table, yellow under the lamp. There was something very human in that late confession, weak and sincere at the same time. On the morning of the 4th day, I opened the black notebook, took up my pen, and wrote back. Caleb, you don't owe your father money. You owe respect. When you've paid that debt, you'll find your own way. A house isn't where there are brick walls. It's where you aren't humiliated when you walk in. If you truly want to meet, Beaufort has the Woods Memorial Bridge where people learn to step over what once sank. Dad. I read it again and folded it carefully. Not bitter, not preachy. Just the truth, as simple as river water flowing. I mailed it at the post office. No name on the outer envelope, only my P.O. box as the return address. That afternoon, I called Martin Hale. His, even slightly raspy voice came on. You got the letter? I did, I said. But this time I don't want to cut him off. I want him to relearn from the start. If he agrees to counseling, could you send him that basic financial skills packet the church put out? Help him understand money isn't a weapon. It's a responsibility. Martin paused, then said, I'll do it. But Horace, are you sure? Do you want to give him another chance? I said, I'm not giving him a chance. I'm just opening the door for the lesson to pass through. After that, I texted Pastor Owens, my old friend in Houston. If Caleb comes to the church, please help him. Teach him how to budget, set priorities, and say thank you without feeling robbed. He replied simply, I understand. Sometimes faith lessons start with shame. That evening, I sat by the window and watched rain fall on the river. I wondered whether Caleb would read that letter with the heart of someone, repentant, or with the ego that had toppled him. Either way, I wasn't planning to go back. Returning to the house in Katy just to see walls that once echoed with laughter, now covered in dust that meant nothing. I'd learned this. A house isn't brick, tile, or a street number. A house is where no one makes you feel small. And I have a house here, among strangers who care enough to ask, have you had lunch yet? A week later, I received an email from Martin. Caleb agreed. He attended the first counseling session at the church. He's not smug. He just sits quietly and takes notes. The pastor says he's learning to listen again. I finished reading and just smiled. A small signal, but truer than any apology. That afternoon, I walked out to the bridge, where the river kept gliding in the sun. I looked into the distance, a bluish horizon, a little fishing boat heading in. I told myself, if one day Caleb has enough courage, he'll cross this bridge, not to come and find me, but to meet himself on the other side, the man I've always believed still existed in my son. I don't know if that day will come, but I know I've done my part. No revenge, no chasing him to the edge, just holding the boundary so kindness doesn't get trampled again. That night, I opened the black notebook and wrote the last lines for this chapter. Forgiveness is opening the door, But whether they step through or stay behind, that's no longer our work. I closed the notebook and turned out the light. Outside, the soft slap of waves under the bridge sounded like a lullaby for souls who know when to stop. I looked up at the ceiling, closed my eyes, and felt truly calm. If tomorrow Caleb comes to Beaufort, I'll be here. I'll invite him to walk the bridge with me and talk like two men, not father, not son, just two people who learned respect in different ways. But if he doesn't come, I'll still cross the bridge every morning, like always. Because, either way, I've come back to myself, and that's the only homecoming a person should never miss. Dawn in Beaufort always arrives like a breath. That morning, I woke earlier than usual and stepped onto the dock while dew still clung to the wooden rail. The surface of the Beaufort River spread with early gold. Gulls wheeled around rooftops, calling hoarsely in the salt and morning wind. Far off, the sun rose slowly behind the tree line, gilding a quiet stretch of sky. I stood still, hands in my jacket pockets, watching small boats bob under the bridge. The sight brought back an old saying: a person is only truly free when he respects himself. And only now, at 68, did I understand self-respect is the only way to save yourself. I opened my palm. In it lay Loretta's wedding ring. It had rested there the whole way from Houston, quiet as a reminder. Early light glinted on the gold band, warm and soft. I whispered, so low only I could hear. I finished the lesson no school teaches and no money can buy. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind slip through my coat, to the water tapping the hulls. Suddenly, I thought of Caleb. If one day he truly steps onto this bridge, I'll be here to listen, not because he's my blood, but because he's learned respect. I won't throw my arms wide, but I'll open my heart, like a man who knows justice isn't punishment, but the moment each person recognizes their own worth. I took out the black notebook and turned to the last page. The paper had thickened with time, salted by the sea breeze and my fingerprints each time I wrote. I held the pen and slowly wrote the final line in the notebook that's been with me since I left Houston. Don't beg for a seat where they despise you. If you must bow your head to stay, it's no longer home. I closed the notebook and heard the covers brush like a period at the end of a chapter. Then I picked up the old canvas tote. Inside it, the wooden toys I'd made during the week. A horse, a little truck, a tiny crocodile with wheels. I carried them to the community center, where the neighborhood kids would get them at the weekend. The young teacher at the center took the bag and beamed. Lord, did you make these by hand? They're beautiful. The kids are going to go crazy. I smiled. They need joy, and I need to feel useful. That's a fair trade. When the kids rushed out, their laughter fell like little notes into the heart. A girl hugged the wooden crocodile. Eyes lit up, then looked up and asked, "Did you really make this, mister?" I nodded. "Yep, I did. But if you like it, consider it something we made together." She laughed and ran off, her small footsteps threading through the light pouring into the hall. I stood there and felt my chest go light as the wind. Maybe every darkness can fade, as long as we're willing to step out. At noon, I returned to the riverfront. The Beaufort breeze carried sea salt and the resin scent of pines along the shore. I sat on the familiar wooden bench and watched the little waves roll in. In that moment, I understood the justice I'd been seeking wasn't seeing someone fall, it was walking upright with a quiet heart. I didn't beat anyone. I just stopped losing to myself. And that's enough. I left the dock when the sun climbed high. Before turning back, I looked over my shoulder, light flared on the water, dazzling, like a blessing from the sea. The wind moved over my shoulders, carrying a soft whisper of waves. Tomorrow, you'll begin again. I smiled. Yes, tomorrow. At any age, we can start over as long as we don't misplace our self-respect and our kindness. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you for spending time with an old man like me. I don't know where you're listening from, Houston, Beaufort, or some small corner of America where you, too, are trying to find peace within yourself. But if in this story you recognize a part of yourself, the part that's been hurt, stayed quiet, and learned to stand again, know this: you're not alone. Leave a comment and tell me where you're from, and share the moment you learned to respect yourself. Every bit of your sharing isn't just for me, it might help someone out there find a way out of their pain. If this story spoke to you, please hit like, subscribe, and keep walking with me into the next journeys where each of us, young or old, can start again with a grateful heart. And if tomorrow you wake up, look in the mirror, and see someone still brave enough to live with decency, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever prayed for you.